Hi, my name is Christine Schutz from the School of Education at the University of Michigan. I work as a literacy research and design specialist at TeachingWorks, and today I'm going to talk to you about one particular instructional approach for teaching foundational skills, interactive writing. So Michigan standards make it very, very clear that foundational skills are extremely important. But what do we mean when we say foundational skills? Well, taking some time to look very, very closely at the standards can help us to understand the important detail inside of foundational skills. So the first standard involves print concepts. This is things like, does a child know the concept of a word, concept of letter? Does the child know that print typically is read from left to right, and then that there's a return sweep that goes down to the bottom? Does a child know particular punctuation marks and how they're used? The second standard addresses phonological awareness. We really want kids to be able to demonstrate an understanding of spoken words, syllables, and sounds, or phonemes. In kindergarten, we want children to be able to isolate and pronounce sounds in 3 phoneme words. So for example, does a child know that in the word dog, the initial sound that he or she hears is D? If we look at a first grade standard, distinguishing long and short vowel sounds in spoken syllable words, this means things like, does a child hear the difference between a word like tap and tape, right? That medial sound inside changes the meaning, and so we have to understand that kind of idea. Another first grade standard actually really requires children to be able to segment words to hear individual sounds. For example, can a child take the word duck and break it down into d, k? So this has to do with kind of hearing these sounds, manipulating these sounds, and really, really influences children's ability to learn to read and write. The foundational skills also include phonics and word recognition to support decoding. For example, in kindergarten, kindergartners really need to know the sounds that letters make. This isn't as easy as one might think. For example, letter names can sometimes be pretty confusing and trip up children's understandings of words. For example, the word W starts with the sound D, so some kids actually think that W makes the sound D. In first grade, we really want children to understand common consonant digraphs. So if kids aren't recognizing things like SH together makes the unique sound of sh, it makes reading and writing really difficult. We also want kids to know things about vowel teams or vowel digraphs, knowing that there are multiple ways to represent a long E, for example. You might be asking yourself, why am I talking about foundational skills for reading when I'm about to discuss an instructional technique that's pretty focused on writing? Well, there are 3 reasons. 1, there's a lot of research that shows a relationship between children's reading and writing development. So things we're working on in interactive writing definitely influence children's foundational skills in reading. Second, reading the text written in interactive writing actually requires the use of these foundational skills. And finally, embedding and contextualizing the teaching of the foundational skills gives children a more meaningful experience that's going to increase their overall understanding. There are some language standards that overlap with some of these foundational standards. For example, Standard 2 under the language standards has to do with conventions of standard English. This basically is that you want kids to have a general understanding of capitalization, punctuation, and spelling when writing. With regard to spelling, we need to think about things like, are there particular generalizations, like word families, syllable patterns, or morphemic analysis that can be supporting kids in becoming more conventional spellers? So now we're going to move into talking about interactive writing. McCarrier and colleagues define interactive writing as a dynamic, collaborative literacy event in which children actively compose together, considering appropriate words and phrases and organization of text and layout. Individual children take over individual parts and share the pen with a teacher, as the teacher is identifying points of instructional value. This really is an instructional activity that supports conventional writing. You'll notice that all the examples of interactive writing that I share today show that writing is done in a conventional way and spelling is conventional. Interactive writing is commonly used in many lower elementary classrooms, and a lot of you probably use interactive writing in your own classrooms today. The most common forms I see in classrooms is using interactive writing for things like morning message and writing thank you notes. They usually involve whole group settings where teachers are trying really hard to engage all learners. You're using things like whiteboards and having children write letters in the air when it's not their turn to come up and actually share the pen at that moment. This instructional technique is actually such an amazing way to support kids in not only becoming better writers, but also developing the critical knowledge and skills that support literacy development all around, including those I referred to earlier. Today, I'm going to push us to think a little bit more critically about the ways in which we can tailor small group interactive writing lessons to support very specific needs that individual learners have and give children opportunities to apply their developing understanding of phonological awareness and letter sound knowledge in very real ways as they write. So interactive writing really is such a powerful instructional technique. It's able to target so many elements that are critical to supporting children to learn to read and write. McCarrier and colleagues wrote a book for practitioners that really unpacks interactive writing and provides images of the products, structures, and ways of supporting kids inside of this particular instructional moment. They talk about interactive writing being a great way to support skills, strategies, and conventions necessary for people to become strong writers. There also have been a few fairly recent empirical studies that suggest that interactive writing is a powerful instructional technique that we should be using in classrooms. Researchers talk about the ways in which interactive writing can support oral language development, because before you write, you're actually talking with kids about what is the message that they want to communicate to others. Researchers also point to the ways in which phonological awareness instruction, letter-sound relationship knowledge, concepts of print, and conventions instruction can be situated inside of interactive writing to make their use much more purposeful. I want to note that those studies have been conducted in kindergarten and first grade classrooms, but without a doubt, second and third grade teachers, this is a strategy that you can be applying with learners, because we know that our classrooms these days are so incredibly diverse, and it's possible that you have second and third grade students who actually have some very real needs that are similar to those of some kindergarten and first grade children. So beyond identifying what can be taught in interactive writing, these research studies also looked at effects on student learning. One study found that kindergartners who participated in interactive writing did the same or better than kindergartners participating in another intervention with regard to word identification, passage comprehension, and word reading development. Another showed that children participating in interactive writing showed greater growth on multiple measures than their comparison group with respect to writing gains. So that's something to keep in mind. This really is a powerful instructional technique that we can be using in our classroom. So just to review, we know a lot can be taught inside of interactive writing. We can talk about phonological awareness, we can teach concepts of print, we can teach phonics, conventions, composition, handwriting, the list goes on and on and on. You'll notice that I've emphasized two of these in red: phonological awareness and phonics. Contextualized instruction really matters for these particular areas. I'd like to challenge you in thinking about how you can be more intentional about incorporating phonological awareness and phonics instruction into your interactive writing lessons. As a field, we've learned quite a bit about essential features of high-quality interactive writing lessons. One important thing to remember is that small group instruction is much more effective than whole group instruction. It allows you to really target the individual needs of children and differentiate in very important ways. Another important thing to consider is that as you're conducting interactive writing sessions, it's important to help your kids to write for authentic and meaningful purposes. Think about, can this writing actually be used for something? Help kids to use writing to teach others, to persuade others, to entertain others, not just to do the writing activity. It's also really important to use interactive writing as a space in which you can be demonstrating how it is that you're segmenting specific words in order to hear different sounds. Children need this. They need to see you doing it. They need to hear you doing it. They need to do it in the company of you. And then they can eventually start doing it on their own in order to aid them in improving their spelling. As a teacher, you also want to think about identifying multiple instructional goals. Interactive writing is a space in which children have to do a lot of integrating. So think about how is it that you can target particular concepts of print? How is it that you can target particular elements of phonological awareness and phonics while still creating rich opportunities for students that don't seem particularly overbearing? Finally, it's very critical that teachers are explicit and provide sufficient scaffolding. As a teacher, use this as an instructional moment. When you notice kids doing something where you need to provide some sort of clarification, use clear and concise language. So right here I have an artifact from a small group interactive writing lesson in a kindergarten. This particular artifact comes from an end-of-day activity that I used to do with small groups of kindergartners in my own classroom. At the end of the day, I would talk with a small group about one memory that they didn't want to ever forget about that day in kindergarten. Interactively, we would write this memory down to capture it and make sure that it was never lost. We would hang these around the classroom in order to chronicle important events from our time together in kindergarten. At the end of the year, this turned into a class book that every student had. I'm going to use that example as I talk through some things to think about when we're planning and preparing for interactive writing lessons. So the goal of an interactive writing lesson is really to contextualize, integrate, and teach phonological awareness, concepts of print, letter-sound relationships, and conventions. Looking at this particular artifact, you can see that a lot of that actually had to have been addressed in order for children to write this. You can see spaces in between words, you can see punctuation, you see moments in which children actually had to think about their high frequency word vocabulary. You see moments in which children had to actually segment words in order to hear individual sounds. There is a lot going on in a lesson to support that. So as you plan, there are a couple of questions you want to ask yourself. You want to ask yourself, what do your learners need? So the 5 children in this group, Connor, Santiago, Lion, Faith, and Zoe, had some similar needs, but they also had some needs that needed to be addressed individually. And so I made decisions as a teacher about how I could support them in doing things. Connor, Zoe, and Lion were representing most sounds in CVC words in their writing, but they needed support in segmenting words to hear more sounds. Lion also needed a little bit of reinforcement when it came to spacing. Santiago had very strong phonemic awareness, but he didn't know all of his letters, and in a recent lesson had actually confused Y and W. Faith needed support hearing initial sounds as well as her understanding of letter-sound correspondence. Those are things I considered as I thought about what will my learners need in this particular lesson. The next question to ask yourself is, where will you situate interactive writing? Where will it go in your day? I've already described where this was situated. It was an end-of-the-day activity when children were working in centers and I pulled another small group to work on this. What supplies are needed? What kind of paper will you use? Will it have lines? Will it not? You'll see that on this paper here, there's a line in which every child's name is written in a different color so that as a teacher I can track participation. In this area here, it's also a great area for children to practice. The other thing to think about is, might you need something to sort of cover up little errors that children make along the way? A lot of teachers spend money on things like cover-up tape or boo-boo tape, I've heard it referred to as, but you can also use labels or Post-its to do that sort of thing. You also want to think about how will you support students in participating if they're not the ones who are writing. So in this particular lesson, children had whiteboards, but it could be that kids are actually writing with their fingers on the on the table in front of them, or it could be that they're just really engaged in watching what their peers are doing and talking about what their peers are doing. Finally, you want to think about how you will track turn-taking and learning. Here, I track turn-taking and learning by using different colors of markers. After the lesson, I could go back and think about what were the opportunities that children were provided and how did they respond to those particular opportunities. I'm going to walk you through one possible protocol for doing interactive writing, using this text as an example. So you'll see we start with launch, and that is sort of launching the situation and the purpose for your writing. In this particular example, it was launched as we need a way to capture our memories to make sure that we can hold on to them as a class forever and really remember what happened in kindergarten. After you've launched this, undoubtedly the children in your group will fire off many different ideas for what they want to write about. This is a particularly challenging moment for you as a teacher because you have to sort of negotiate with the children in order to first come up with an idea that they all sort of agree on, and second, come up with a kind of sentence or multiple sentences that will allow you to target specific things with different children. So in this particular moment, the children were really excited about a unit on bakeries that we were doing. And we had visited the bread store. And so we got to a point where we decided it would be great for us to write a sentence that read, "We went to the bread store." I was particularly excited about this sentence, knowing that Santiago had struggled with the distinction between Y and W because I knew it would give him opportunities to practice that. Those are the types of things you have to have sort of running in the back of your mind as you're coming up with a particular sentence. Once you've decided on that sentence, you want to reinforce it. You want to burn this sentence into children's minds. How many times do you sit down next to a child who has started writing something and then when you ask what they're writing, they look at you like they have no idea? Or they sort of are expending so much cognitive energy in coding and trying to hear particular sounds and represent those sounds that they end up, by the time they get to the third word in the sentence, not knowing what comes next. So as a group, we reinforce this sentence. So I would say it with me. We went to the bread store. And the class would say it all together. The small group would say it all together. We would say it multiple times, making sure that kids really were understanding what it was that we were going to be writing. Oftentimes, with young learners, I also have them count the number of words so they have an idea of what to expect. So we would say, "We went to the bread store." So 6 words, and do that over and over again. One little trick that I learned actually from a fellow kindergarten teacher years ago was the idea of sort of showing kids where spaces might go. So when you count, you might say something like, "We went to," with the spots in between your fingers actually representing those spaces. Once you've got that sentence down, it's time to get going. So I always start by asking children, what's the first word we're going to start with? We identify that word, we stretch it or segment it into particular sounds, and then we share the pen. There are times in which children are writing the entire word. There are times in which they're writing the sounds in the word that they hear, but I'm always keeping in mind that I want it to be inside of their particular learning zone at that time. So if there are particular elements of the writing that they might not be ready for, as a teacher, I'm going to write those in order to allow us to write using conventional spelling. Once we've finished writing that first word, then we're going to read that word. So we would say, "We," and then think about, so what's the next word that we need to write now? "We went." And at that point, we would go back up to the beginning. We've identified the next word we need to write, "went," and we would go through the process of stretching or segmenting to hear particular sounds, sharing the pen, and then read and rereading the sentence or up to the point where we had finished. This continues until you finish that actual sentence, and then you launch into a closing. During a closing, it's always really important to be thinking about what is it that you were targeting in this particular lesson, and what sort of teachable moments might have crept up. You want to think about who are your particular learners? What kinds of things might they need more reinforcement with. With this particular group, I still wanted to reinforce things like concept of word, concept of letter, where do we put particular spaces? So as a team, we went through, we counted the letters, we counted the words, we counted the spaces, and you can see that written right there. Before this group actually departed, each child had an opportunity to read this sentence, pointing under each word. That's really important because as this hangs in our classroom, then they can go back and they can read this sentence. They can teach their friends how to read this particular sentence as well. When someone sits down to actually illustrate this in our morning meeting time, then the children remember actually what has been written here. So now the question becomes, when in my day do I do this? Well, there are lots of opportunities. This isn't something that we can only do during one particular time of day. We can use it inside and outside of the literacy block. For example, in writing, you're targeting specific text types according to the Michigan standards. You're teaching kids to write narratives, informative explanatory texts, and also opinion texts. So this is something you can be doing in your writing block. For example, when working on informational texts, here's an example of a diagram that was done interactively with students in order to help them understand the ways in which they could use diagrams to support teaching other people about particular content in informative explanatory texts. This one here is actually written in Spanish, and so it says el cuerpo, and then you can see the arrow pointing to the ojo or the eye, the arrow pointing to the nariz, and you can see moments in which children and the teacher were writing. Here's another example of interactive writing used in informational text, in which the teacher and the children were writing a procedural text about how to make a ball and scoop, which is a game that they all learned how to play. You can also use this inside small group reading instruction. So here are two examples. One shows how children were writing their own pages to add to sort of a leveled text that they were reading. The teacher was emphasizing the use of quotation marks, but also was sort of helping students to draw upon their phonological awareness and then also phonics. This example here is actually taken from an opportunity in which teachers were trying to support children in writing about what they read. You can see the emphasis on particular consonant blends and like tr and trash, and also on consonant digraphs. So th in that, th in through, and sh in ships. You can also really incorporate interactive writing into the content areas. It's a great way to have kids actually start using some of the new vocabulary that they're acquiring from read-alouds. So here's another example in Spanish in which the class had done a unit on marine life, and the children learned a lot about marine animals. And so here is a cover page that the teacher had done, but then the children started writing facts that they had learned about la orca, or the orca. And so the class had written, la orca es una ballena dentada, which is the orca is a toothed whale. La orca tiene un respiradero, no tiene agallas. The orca has a blowhole, it does not have gills. And so you see the ways in which teachers are using interactive writing, and they're really helping kids to grapple with issues around phonological awareness and phonics in order to communicate in very real ways and show the world things that they're learning. This is another example of how a teacher used interactive writing inside of a social studies unit on communities. Here the class created their own community, and so they have a fire station, and they have a church, and they have a grocery store, and so they labeled these in small groups and then put the labels up on the wall. So I have a few closing tips for doing strong interactive writing lessons. One is start using small groups. They really allow for more targeted instruction. You can use this inside of sort of small group instruction time, or you can pull kids when other kids are working on small things. Inside of workshop, you can always pull a small group to work on something. The second is to plan and be intentional. Have an idea of what you want particular learners to be learning inside of this lesson. Think about the ways in which you can particularly target those things. Of course, you want to leave opportunity for those teachable moments to arise, but having a plan is really going to help you out. Again, I'm going back to what I challenged you to think about earlier. Target phonological awareness and phonics. Show kids how you are stretching out those words. Help them to stretch out their words on their own so they don't depend on you, because you're not going to be there next to them the next time they have to sit down and write something. Also, think about incorporating phonics instruction. This is a really rich way in which you can contextualize phonics. Be explicit. Notice, name, and explain the things that you see children grappling with. Again, by contextualizing this learning and this teaching, you're making it so it matters that much more to kids. Finally, structure matters. I shared one particular protocol that might help you kind of structure your interactive writing lessons. That's not the only protocol out there. But remember that you want your lesson to have a beginning, middle, and an end. And you want to think about the ways in which you're distributing participation so that all kids have an opportunity to be successful. Thank you.